My project is on the social and cultural impact of female household workers in Mexico City. This is a very personal project to me because my whole family is from Mexico City, and I grew up in Mexico City up until when I was 7 years old when we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. But while we lived in Mexico City, we had a household worker who lived with us, and that was just the norm in Mexico, especially in Mexico City. Most middle class to upper class families have one or if not multiple household workers. So then when I was in Spanish class with Senora Martin, we watched the movie Roma, and I had watched it once when I was younger, but rewatching it gave me a whole different perspective, having now lived in the United States for 10 years and just seeing how different household workers get treated here compared to in Mexico. So I wanted to answer the main question. Sorry. On what social and cultural factors contribute to the extreme marginalization of these workers, and not only that, why it has prevailed for so long, especially now in the 21st century, that there's been so much social change, but these group of workers have been left stuck behind, and they haven't progressed their rights for so long. So more about the history of this. They've been very historically marginalized. So ever since the Spaniards came to colonize Mexico, they set up the caste system, in Spanish, the casta system, which it was based on religious purity. And at the top were the Spaniards, who were the Peninsulares, who were the Spaniards born in Spain, and at the bottom were African slaves and indigenous peoples. And these indigenous people and African slaves worked for the white Spanish masters. And from this time period, it set up a precedent of indigenous inferiority in society. Now, I had two objectives for this research. The first one was to analyze the roots, specifically social and cultural norms that lead to the perpetuation of this discrimination, both in the past and now in the present. And then also I wanted to evaluate the effectiveness of legal reforms and the role of NGOs in both setting protection for these rights and establishing these rights, while also proposing a paradigm shift that talked about governmental oversight and education on labor rights. I had a mixed media process. So my first method was reviewing previous studies. My second method, I interviewed two individuals. The first one, a former household worker who is now the director and founder of CASE, which is one of the leading NGOs that supports the rights of household workers in Mexico City. And the second, a present household worker with over 25 years of work experience. And then the third was an analysis on social cultural factors. So first and foremost, it's very important to recognize that household work in Mexico is part of an informal sector. So although this is the second largest employment for women, 99.3 of these women work under informal conditions, meaning there's no larger entity overlooking these workers and there's no formal binding contract. So it's more usually just a verbal agreement of you do this and I'll pay you this. And this can create a tricky situation because it establishes a very unbalanced power dynamic between employer and employee. And these women make up a very crucial part of society that is very overlooked. These women make up almost 30% of the GDP, and even this, they don't receive any legal protection or really truly any labor benefits. Specifically, by these workers coming into employers' homes, these employers, especially the women, can go out and receive an education and have a job and produce for society. Onto their wage inequality and their working conditions. This is a very low-paying job, and even though there's technically an established minimum wage, these workers are often underpaid that. And when I encountered that, I thought, why wouldn't they just get another job, which is an ignorant thing to ask, because this job serves as an economic safeguard for these women, as it's a very feasible job. It's a very saturated labor market, and in Mexico, people are always in need of household workers. So this work provides flexible hours, which allows these women to both provide economic means for their own families, while also being able to go back home and take care of their children, their husbands, and their household. Because in Mexico, there's very traditional labor structure still of the woman is in charge of the household. So, for example, when Mexico joined NAFTA, there was an influx of factory jobs. And a lot of these women ventured into these jobs because although they didn't necessarily pay these women more, they received a formal contract that provided them with actual labor rights. Yet these women went back, most of them went back to household work because these factory jobs didn't provide the same flexibility that household work did. This leads to a cycle of sub-exploitation because since this low is so low paying, they are forced to go into different side jobs. So this just reinforces a cycle of informal work with little to no labor rights. So another interesting thing that's that adds to the complexity of this issue is that these women experience discrimination from many different angles, one of them being gender. This is sector dominated by women. It's more than 90% women. And as household work is still seen as an extension of a woman's natural role, it's not considered a job or a profession, but rather you're a help in someone's home. You're just helping them out. So this deprivates these women also further from educational opportunities. For instance, in low-income households, when the parents don't have enough money to provide for all their children's educational needs, those funds will be allocated towards the males of the family because they're thought to be a better investment because men can work for a longer period of time than women can. For example, if a woman gets pregnant, she has to go on maternity leave. So a lot of the times, these women don't get proper education, and women who do get proper education usually don't talk about these issues because they're the same people employing these workers. So some women stated in a feminist article they would not talk about paid household work, and they said because you don't air your dirty laundry. The next sector is the factors of ethnicity. So a lot of these women are indigenous, and thus this perpetuates a further lack of social recognition and reinforces a cycle of exclusion that's been going on for centuries. In this figure, you can see household workers protesting during COVID because of their lack of labor rights. During COVID, these workers were forced to quarantine in their employers' homes and were deprived from seeing their families for a long period of time. And in this image, they're asking for there to not be discrimination from part of the government. And the factor for class, these women are often depicted as uneducated and unskilled. And with this, employers can exploit their economic necessity with the deprivation of rights. So with fear of demanding rights, a lot of these workers will be okay with receiving no labor rights because they just need a job and they need pay. So if they were, a lot of times the major reason they get fired is because they do ask for these rights. And so the employer in their mindset, it's, okay, I'm going to fire you then, and I'm going to find someone who is okay with little pay and no rights. So most people just stay in those conditions because they need the money. Now, this crosses over to the important topic of insufficient government oversight. Mexico, just in general, has very low levels of spending on public programs. This means that a lot of these public programs often don't either get made, or if they do, they're very underfunded. Thus, they don't work properly like they should. So in 2022, the Social Security reform said that Social Security was now mandatory for all household workers. Yet, after this reform, only 2% of these 2.5 million household workers are enrolled in this new Social Security program. And before that, Social Security was voluntary, which basically meant almost no one would do it, and the percentage for that was 0.1%. Same thing with the pension. It's not even 2% of these workers who have pension, which means these women often work until they're very old. Oftentimes, it's an attitude of loyalty. So a lot of these workers will stay with those families since they're young. They'll grow up, they'll stay with the same person, and these women will be working for their employer until they're upwards 60 years old. This leads to the crucial role of NGOs in advocating for these workers' rights. These workers have been silenced for so long, and they don't have a voice in society. So these NGOs promote these legislative changes, and importantly, they educate both employers and household workers. For example, CASE, the foundation Marcelina founded, educates these workers on a range. So they educate them on how to actually do the job, how to clean, how to cook, all the way to teaching them about their rights as women and their rights as workers. And this also fosters a sense of community and self-empowerment, because people get empowered when they learn and when they know. So in this image, you can see two household workers celebrating when the new Social Security pilot program got released. And when I did my interview with Marcelina, she actually, you can pass it through, she gifted me this glove, which in the center it says el tiempo es ahora, which means the time is now, which is their new promotion, talking about how we need to talk about these labor rights now because they've been silenced for so long. So you can see these women celebrating, and this glove is a symbol of this movement. On to the advances. So these are some key advancements that have happened over time. So in 1970s, the Constitution recognized household workers for the very first time. Then in 1970s, there was said for the Minimum Wage Commission to set a professional minimum wage. And then in 2022, the new mandatory Social Security law got implemented. Yet, out of all this progress, none of them have been effectively put into society, as we can see by the statistics. So another key aspect that I want to highlight was the ratification of 189 from the International Labor Organization. This was a very key step in the progress and advocacy for household workers, as it was the first time that household work got recognized as a legitimate job. So this is important because this meant that household workers were to be treated and given the same rights as any other worker. This is also very important because it fostered international attention and involvement, which just shows that international pressure can lead to more change. Because if it's just the Mexican government within themselves, and for so many years there hasn't been much movement, international attention can really help to progress these rights. So future challenges. So two of the main ones are effective implementation. There's very clearly been a lack of governmental oversight. These laws get put into place, but they don't get followed up. And second of all, there's still a cultural resistance to recognize these household workers. There's this idea that they're less than and they're inherently deserve less, and people can just get away with treating them wrong because nothing happens to employers if they don't provide for these rights, and they're just a group of people who is so invisible. I saw this quote in one of my research papers, and it says, household work is invisible unless it doesn't get done. So that just shows how these people just get mistreated for the important work they do. And the role of government and legal institutions, again, it's important to educate not just employers, but also workers on the rights that they do have, because oftentimes these workers don't even know the rights that they can have access to. And also ensure the recognition and enforcement of laws, because what's happening now is the workers that do know their rights and demand their rights end up getting fired. So it's not really serving anyone except for the employers. Now, to the interviews I did, these are two very interesting interviews, and I'm going to start off with Maria. She wanted to go under an anonymous name, which I think that just kind of shows the further fear to speak up about this issue. She has over 25 years of work experience, and she's indigenous. She speaks Mije. She's from Oaxaca. And she started working at the age of 30 out of economic urgency. Her father got really sick, and so he couldn't work anymore. So she set out to Mexico City to look for a job, and the easiest job to get into was household work. Marcelina Bautista is also originally from Oaxaca. She worked in household work, started at 14 years old, and then at 17 she got involved with a local Catholic youth group in which the pastor taught her about the rights that she had, and in which in that moment she realized how discriminated she was being against. So then in 1988 she participated in the Latin American Domestic Workers Conference, which gave her a more international view on this issue, and with the things that she learned at that conference she wanted to bring over to implement in Mexico. So then in 2000 she got together a group of workers and founded CASE herself, and she also founded the first union for household workers. So with Maria, the biggest thing we found just was the reinforcement of the lack of Social Security. All her career, she's never had a formal contract, never had health insurance, never had retirement, never had Social Security, and it wasn't until her most recent employer where she now has 4 paid leave vacation days, which is something new that she's never had before. She talks about how employers usually do know the rights of household workers, they just choose not to do it because it comes as an economic expense, and so they're not willing to face that. So it's more of an inconvenience to them. So it's important for these NGOs to promote legislative change and also empower these workers through training. Here I show some images from CASE's website where they have different resources for household workers and employers to look at about the practices, about what days should be vacation days. This is also more about their rights. And then this is about how to subscribe to the new Social Security program, because when my outside mentor and I, we were trying to look at how to do it if I was, like, let's say I was a household worker, and it's a very tricky process. Like, it's not very clear on, like, Mexico's, like, governmental page, like, how to do it, so they walk you through it simply, which helps also a lot. Additionally, the importance of NGOs, they help create public policies that support the enforcement of these labor rights. And they also collaborate with this international bodies. So they are the segue that connects all this and gives these workers a voice. Marcelina talks about how when she started CASE, there was no set laws actually protecting household workers. So they went to the government and they would say, we're missing these rights. And they would be like, well, we can't help you because there's no law protecting you. So even if someone were to be like, I got unjustly fired, they can't do anything because it's not in the law. So now that there is law on our side, now it's just a question of enforcing it. So this is why in the future there's a great need for a new labor paradigm in households so that employers genuinely respect their workers and see them as equals and not as less than, and also robust government oversight and enforcement of laws supporting domestic workers. Because if these laws don't get reinforced, it's like they're not even there.
I'm going to start because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. I had a chance to talk to you briefly. I lived for 3 years in Lima, and I had an empleada who became very dear to me, and as I explained to you. You can find this scenario play out throughout all of Latin America, Spanish-speaking America, Portuguese-speaking Latin America, and probably in any parts of the world where there are there's a large underclass. But it's such a huge part of the cultural landscape of Latin America to have people work for you in the houses, and you don't have to be. We associate maids oftentimes with people who have a little bit more, they're more affluent, and it's not necessarily the case in Latin America. You don't have to necessarily be affluent to have many people working for you. And I just want to tell you that this project, you could take this all the way to the doctoral level, in all honesty, this study. It's really interesting. And I mean, there's be a lot more work you need to be doing, but if this is something you're interested in, I think you really could go far with this. I didn't know that you had spent so much time in Mexico City either. Did you go to an American or public school?
I went to an American school. I used to go to, I went to another private school that was in American, but then in first grade I switched to an American school, yeah.
So you're already familiar with it. There's a lot of classism throughout Latin America. And I want other people to ask you questions, but to me, there's so much fear with the people who work in these jobs because this is an income. I know that my Sylvia that worked for me, the money that I gave her, and I gave her way above the norm because I just couldn't believe what they were being paid. It was being used for her children's education, basic things. I mean, it helped her household considerably. I think that one of the problems that the government programs, they're well-meaning, but there's such a huge fear how to overcome that fear of losing jobs, because it's so ubiquitous throughout all of the households in Mexico and in all these countries, how they're going to get around that issue, because a lot of these people don't have a lot of education, and this is their one, this is the informal economy, and it makes them, it gives them something. Unfortunately, there is, as you indicated, so much exploitation. This is really an interesting topic, but I'm going to let other people ask you questions.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely do want to take this further on. I definitely want to take it to college. I already told my outside mentor about that. And a very big thing about the fear aspect is that these employers don't have any consequences as of right now. So that's a very big thing that I think needs to happen. So I read about this in my paper a little bit, but in order for there to be less fear, there needs to be a consequence. So either like an anonymous reporting, like evaluation that happens that the government brings, so that workers can like evaluate their employers, and so the government can like fine employers who are not meeting these rights, because it's just so sad that there has been legal change, but there really hasn't. So they're there, it's happening, but if no one is reinforcing it, it's not going to progress much further than this. It's been like this for centuries.
I do think that there are some workers who become so entrenched in the life of a family, depending on whether they raise the children, cooked and cleaned, because there's also a hierarchy even within the staff in the household.
Yeah.
Some of them become integrated in the house, and when they get into their senior, not 60 by the way, much older years, the family takes care of them. That's I saw that personally.
Yeah, it's a very interesting work dynamic, because it's not like you're going into your office and going to work. You're going into this employer's private home, and it's a very unique relationship, because oftentimes people say like, yeah, they're like family, like they're like, because they're such an intimate part of the family's home. They know your likes, they know your dislikes, they answer your phone calls, they run your errands, they pick your kids up from school. They're like almost, well, I saw this when I was growing up with a nanny, like they're almost like another parental figure almost. Like you get in trouble, like they tell you stop fighting with your siblings. So it's it becomes very tricky, and it's a very complex relationship.
And yes, they can't eat with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lisa, I would love to learn more about kind of how these workers get placed with their families. Are there agencies? Is there
No, so that's also another issue. It's mostly just word of mouth. Or, for example, I know where I grew up, there's this one church that a lot of, it's just known to like a lot of household workers go there, and like if you need a household worker, you'll go to the church and be like, I need a household worker, and you'll like pick one and like take them home with you and like see if it works out. But most of the times it's literally just word of mouth, like, oh, they used to work for I don't know, they used to work for my other family, like, but now like we're moving, so like, do you want her to work for you? It's mostly that. Yeah.
How are you able to secure the interview with Marcelina?
Yes, so I was so excited. My family can tell you, like the night before, I was literally just like, I was looking up anything I could about her. I was so excited. But initially I found her through one of my research papers. They mentioned a lot of NGOs and important people, and most of them notably, like a lot of these NGOs like are not there anymore because of a lack of funding, but Marcelina's was one of the ones that is still there. So I found her, I annotated it, I was like, try to get interview in all capitals, and then I planned a trip to Mexico City, and so I emailed her through, I found Costa's website, I found her email, and I emailed her, told her what I was doing, and asked her if there could be a time for us to interview, and then she emailed me back and like sent me her number, so then I texted her on WhatsApp, and then she didn't respond for like a couple of days, and I was already in Mexico, she hadn't responded, so I was like, okay, I really wanted to do this interview, so I texted her back, and then she responded, and then we set up a time to meet at a coffee shop, and it was I love that experience. It was like my favorite part of this whole like process. It was just so interesting talking to her and seeing like her experiences and like all that she has done. She's so humble, but she's like one of the biggest voices in this movement. And like when I do carry on this project like further on in college, she's definitely like someone I'll keep in touch with. So yeah.
How many days a week do these women work typically? Because the four day vacation really like struck me when I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah.
Vacation days.
It's usually 6 days a week. Yeah, it's usually 6 days a week, and then Sundays they get to go home with their families. Like, not all household workers are live-in, but the ones who are live-in, they do work 6 days a week, and sometimes they'll come and go. But a lot of these workers commute from so far away. Like, they'll wake up at like 3 a.m. to do the 3-hour commute, get there at 6 a.m, and have their breakfast ready by 7.
So when you talked about the hours being more flexible, it doesn't seem very flexible to me.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but I think
flexible.
Yeah, I think they were alluding to non-live-in household workers because a lot of the household workers, like there's some that will just come and clean. Like in Mexico with household work, it's very broad. There's a lot of times people who have multiple, it's like different roles. It's like you have the woman who cooks and you have the woman who cleans your laundry and cleans the house, and then you have the chauffeur. Like, so I think that's the flexibility that they're talking about.
Lisa, I wonder if you could talk to them when you and I were talking about
Yeah.
some of these people that kind of have like these, actually you referred to like some of these side jobs, but you were talking to me about some of these workers that they're working for a particular family, but they might get a side, I don't know if you want to call it that, gig of doing another person's just like their laundry or something.
Okay,
Some
yeah.
of the complexities that come with that, of them being in working for
Yeah.
several different households and.
So, for instance, if this has happened within my own family, let's say we go visit our family in Mexico City, and our aunt's like household worker is like doing a load of laundry, and my family's in town, and so let's say one of my parents goes up there and her and be like, "Can you do my laundry?" And she was like, "No, I can't," because she already had the other 4 people to do their laundry, and it's not like we're paying her. It's like she's not working for it, but it's kind of becomes this complex thing because it's not formal where it's like this is your role. It's kind of just do whatever since it's a verbal contract. So it becomes complex because it's kind of just like if you want her to go buy your groceries, it's like just go buy my groceries, and not just like in the United States when you hire someone, it's like they'll do this, this, and this, and then if you don't and you fire them, you're gonna get sued. But like there, it's kind of just a do whatever thing, and it becomes very complex when like family comes in or you ask them for extra favors because then their employer kind of looks down on that, and you're like, oh, see, like this is why, like we can't get them accustomed to like. I don't know, when even there's like a little bit of resistance, it becomes like a bad thing. Like for example, some people pay them extra like on Christmas, on like an annual bonus, but sometimes people will be like, don't do that because they'll get used to it and they'll start asking for more. So that's what's very complex about that. Yes.
Go ahead. Okay. So thank you. This was very interesting. I really enjoyed reading this. And as I was reading the paper and listening to your presentation too, I found some, and maybe I'm incorrect, some parallels between what's happening currently and has been happening and what happens in America after slavery, specifically with the book The Help. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, someone mentioned that book.
So it's
yeah,
kind of a similar situation where these are informal household workers, more nannies, more childcare, but still just like upkeep of the house. And then that also made me think of gypsies. I think our term is travelers now, Irish travelers. I only know them because I watched that show that was on TLC like forever ago, like My Big Fat Gypsy.
Oh my God, I watched that.
It was fabulously terrible. So yes, I watched it. But just thinking that, and taking it further, there's these different cultural pockets around the world that are experiencing something similar and using this model of looking at what's going on, what's happened with legislation, what can we do with organizations to kind of change this and make it better. And I was also thinking too how you said, you know, a woman's work is in the home, so you're helping somebody out. This is not a job. Okay. Some people didn't get that gene, okay?
Yeah.
So, but it also made me think of in different movies I would watch, they would, you know, a truck would pull up behind Home Depot and like, oh, who needs to work today? And there would be workers, and they would say yeah, and they would go, and so it was. So I thought it just made me think that it's not just gender specific, it's not just like culture specific. And then, sorry, that was my tangent. And my question is, with the Social Security, how does it work? Do employers and employees both have to pay in, or is it just the employers? I know you said it's complex. So.
Yeah, I try to read into it. This is like I'm pretty sure the employer has to subscribe their employee into it, like under them, or it was something like that. I don't know, I was trying to look at the website, and me and my outside mentor were trying to figure it out, and I was like, I don't know how they do this, because
I'm just wondering if that's, so for example, in America, if I needed to hire a nanny or a household worker, I think a lot of the time people would rather be paid under the table, because then they don't have to pay the taxes that would go to Social Security and healthcare and whatever else. So I didn't know if it was similar, and if maybe that could be part of the reason, because they, like you said, they want the money now.
Yeah,
because they need it
I
now,
did read about
versus,
that briefly. Like, it's like something about like they don't make enough for it to be actually benefiting them. So it's a very like complex, because then there's like all these like restrictions on like who can and who can't, like what you have to do. So it's like most people just choose not to.
Okay.
So, yeah. So
So I wanted to ask, oh, sorry, are you done? Just
No,
you
go
being
ahead.
done? I wanted to ask you about Maria and how you got connected with Maria. Was it through Marcelina's
it was through
organization?
a personal relationship who we knew.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
What was her reaction to your questions to her? And
Yes, so she was very apprehensive at
Yeah.
first. She was like, I'm only doing this because I know you guys, but when I first sent her the questions, she was like, okay, I'll do it, but I'm only going to answer in yes or no. And I was like, okay, I don't want her to feel uncomfortable, so I'm gonna get what I can. So then we were on the call with her, and I explained to her like what I was doing, and then I was like, thank you so much for doing this, like whatever you feel comfortable asking. And then as we got further into the interview, she got very comfortable, and she didn't just answer in yes or no, she like fully answered us, which was very helpful. But it just kind of shows like Mr. Mitchell was saying, like the fear, like it's just not a talked about thing. And like I even mentioned in the last paragraph, I'm pretty sure, of what I wrote, that it's like it's gonna be controversial, but like a modern day slavery. Like it's just like so sad how far society has progressed, and these people, it just hasn't. So yeah.
Did it make you think back about your own interactions with people that worked for you?
Yeah, it definitely, it's an uncomfortable place to be at, because then I'm there and I'm like, oh wow, like, I mean obviously as a child, but I was like, we were like part of the problem, like, so it makes you like rethink. But I feel like that's a very crucial step to take, and have those uncomfortable conversations, because I think that's why, another reason why it's been such an issue, because people don't want to talk about it, because the people who do have the power to make the change have those employers, and if they speak out about it, I mean, they're going to have to change and look within themselves too. So
Really, great job. Thank you.
Yeah.
thank you.